What is up, everyone? Welcome in. This is your group therapy session episode of Coast to Coast. I'm Joey Powell. We have got something special for you tonight. If the performance on the floor by the North Carolina Tar Heels the last 2 weeks has you down, we're going to try to make this a safe space where everybody can get themselves out into feeling, can get their words into the ether, can come to grips with what's happening. And yeah, if you're here expecting me to like bang a drum and want to fire a bunch of people, that's not really our job, and that's not really the vibe of this year's show. I want to say, there's plenty of time for that, and I think there are probably a lot of folks who have their feelings about that, and we can talk about what the coaching staff's deficiencies are. But I want to go ahead and get out in front. If you're here specifically joining us tonight to hear me and Sherrell and Sean and Justin all like carry torches and want somebody fired, that's not really our thing. But what is our thing is bring you some good analysis of what's going on around the Tar Heel basketball program, and we will do our best to, as my old man says, polish a turd, because that's kind of what we've seen the last little bit from North Carolina. It just hasn't been pretty. I know this has been painful for a lot of folks watching out in IC subscriber world. So Justin was kind enough to join us tonight. He's worn the uniform. He's lifted a trophy. He's got his name up in the rafters. Sherrell and Sean are the guys that actually do the heavy lifting for the show most of the time. So we'll try to make this as good as we can. I'm Joey Powell. We are brought to you by Congruity and Johnny T-Shirt. Guys, this is a lot different than the last time the four of us were together. For those of you in the audience who may not remember, man, we had discussions about the tournament in Maui, and we were kind of previewing that and what we expected to go down and how we thought things would look. And boy, I'm going to tell you, if there are two different things that you can compare that might make a difference, I don't know if it's apples and anti-lock brakes, or I don't know, but that's the chasm of the difference between what we have right now with North Carolina basketball and what we thought we were going to see before they headed out to Maui. To reset, Tar Heels have lost 4 of 5. They are now 13-10 overall, sitting at 6-5 in the ACC. 2 more tough games coming up. They do have an off week this week, which is why we felt like we just get in here and have some therapy. So first things first, I'm going to go to Justin, and I'm only going to Justin because he is the guest here, and he's the only one out of the 4 of us who have actually worn the UNC uniform. So, Justin, I think the first thing I would ask you is, we heard Hubert Davis say emphatically on Thursday in the pregame presser, I guess if you want to say that, it's his media availability before the game. Somebody asked him a question about getting singles or hitting home runs, and Hubert Davis said, "We'll be ready to play on Saturday." What do you think about that answer versus what you saw in the first 10 minutes of game action in Durham on Saturday night in Cameron?
Well, I mean, I want to start off. That was a pretty gloomy intro, man. I hope that y'all are doing unbelievable outside of obviously the way our Tar Heels have been playing. I think the more I think about it, there has to be a few things that you put into perspective, right? Like, we can sit here and we can say, "Oh man, they weren't ready to play," or you can sit there and you can throw fire at Coach Davis. You can point fingers all you want, but we've got to put a few things into perspective. You've got a Duke team, and by no means is any talk of Duke me supporting them. There's still those feelings towards them, right? But you've got a national championship level team in Duke, right? And you've got a team that we have that's still trying to find any kind of who they are, what their identity is, what their strengths are. So you basically have polar opposites coming into a rivalry game in Cameron Indoor. And for the people that have never been in Cameron Indoor, you let that Duke team get on a run or hit a few shots, and it begins to you can't think. Like certain things you're supposed to do in a game, you just forget, right? Like, you just, at times you forget to breathe. Like, it's that crazy, especially for a Duke North Carolina game. So you have that perspective. then you have a perspective of I was watching the game and I was watching with my wife's side of the family was over. We were watching it. Obviously, I was trying to get all hyped before the game and everything like that. And I started watching the game, and it felt like the first 10 minutes of the game they didn't touch the paint. Like North Carolina did not get into the paint at all. Um, and so a testament to that once again is to Duke and the defensive schemes that they had. They literally switched everything all game, which took us out of it. But it goes back to some of the things that we talked about all season, like not having a big down low that these guys have to really be worried about. Um, Hurts against a switching defense. Not having guys that can stretch the floor and be able to shoot the ball at a highly consistent rate hurts against a switching team. Um, but then it just didn't seem like there was really much of any kind of flow, right? Like, so I think, like you said, I'm sitting here. Thankfully, I'm not in that locker room and I'm not having to make decisions. But I think that's kind of for me when I look at it. Yeah, I can sit here and say they didn't play well. They obviously didn't play great, but it was a combination of both. North Carolina just isn't a great basketball team right now, and Duke is a really good basketball team. So, I guess we'll just kind of see how this goes. Going into these next couple games. But that was my take from watching that game.
Yeah, and I think that's all fair. Something I will go ahead and throw this out for the rest of the show too. I think there's reasons to be upset. There's reasons to be mad. I think it's okay to have your opinion about where this team is and where they're not. I just ask if you're going to be in the chat tonight, just try to be respectful. If you're going to be on social media, try to be respectful. It's okay to be mad. Just take it easy when you're attacking, players, coaches, other folks in the chat. Just try to be respectful. There's a lot going on in the world, and everybody's battling something. So keep that in mind. Something I'll ask you guys. Give me one word. I'm start with you, Sherrell. One word to describe where UNC hoops is right now, and you can give me the short answer and be a real smart ass and just give me one word. You can give me a word that we might need to get Siegley to bleep later on. I don't care. If you want to give me a word and then back it up with some talk, that's fine too, man. But I'll pass this off to you now. Give me one word, Sherrell.
I'll give you a phrase, and just down bad is the phrase I'll use.
Down bad works. All right, that's also something the kids these days will appreciate. So I'm going to say that's there's no cap on what you just said, Sherrell. Sean, I'll ask you the same thing, man.
I think more for this week was probably helpless, and just in terms of watching it, against Duke, as well as probably the last 8 minutes against Pittsburgh, which I think we're all fairly lucky being UNC fans, so that's not a normal feeling. But I think in that first 10 minutes, as Justin referenced, was similar to the team that went to the title game at the Dean Dome, in terms of how that first 10 minutes went as well, and almost thinking, hey, is this going to be a 40 point game? So that'd probably be the one word, not for the season, but for this week, in terms of how I was feeling watching that.
I'm going to jump in, Joey. And I think what you said, Sean, is a good point, because you don't want to come in here and just bury the team and be overly negative. But at the same time, they haven't given you a ton to be positive about. And so I've seen folks kind of say like, oh, the second half, maybe they found something. Let's be clear and honest. Duke was not playing hard. The game was over.
Shire let off the gas.
Yeah, they weren't trying as hard as they were before. So I think folks who are trying to take positives from that second half are really doing themselves, and frankly the team a disservice, because that wasn't real basketball, so to speak. I mean, I guess it's real because you're playing and you're competing, but it wasn't the same as it was in the first half. Like, let's be clear. There's a giant Grand Canyon between where these programs are right now. And I think that's what you saw on Saturday. So we first need to acknowledge that. Like, the first thing is you acceptance is the first step towards healing. Like, Carolina is not a great program right now. And that's just a fact. It's not fun. Nobody likes it. But that's where they are. So the issue now is like, how do you try to get better? And how do you try to get better? Not just from a high level, how do you try to get better next Saturday against Pitt? Because that's the next opportunity. That's the next opportunity in a game you have to get better. The next opportunity is probably tomorrow at practice. But like, how do you get better? Because all the goals are gone. We've said that over and over. Each time we were like, okay, we're recalibrating. Everything is gone. the only thing to play for right now is kind of pride, is for all the stuff that the North Carolina staff says they wanted to play for, which is the name on the front of the jersey and all that stuff. So, like, how do you pull yourself up and do it? Because, I mean, those guys, they see everything we see. They see what we're saying. They know that they're not playing well. They know that the world, their head coach of the world is not fond of him right now. They understand that. So, like, how do you get yourself together over the next week and get ready to play a game on Saturday and not come out feeling like, everything's over? How do you motivate yourself, I guess, is the question, over the next 7 days?
Yeah, hold that thought. We're going to get into that a little bit. Shout out to William Johnson in the chat, who just came to post Duke Nation, baby. I mean, you've got the best overall team that Duke has had in many, many years, and you, sir, are on an Inside Carolina chat the night after y'all just put belts to behinds. I mean, what's up with the priorities there, buddy? Shout out to the almost 300 people that are joining us tonight, too. Justin, it's only fair. I'll give you the same thing. Give me one word, man.
I think I'll say grasping. I think that's the word I'll use. I think kind of like what we talk about with the identity and who are we as a team and what are we going to do. This 4-game stretch, starting with the Pittsburgh game, then the Duke, then Pitt, then Clemson, going into that 4-game stretch for me was the most important stretch the entire season anyways. And so I think now for us to sit here, and we've had the results of the 2 games, for us to sit here and now say all of these negative things, like, this stuff has been happening pretty consistently throughout the year, right? It's just the talent and the teams in the ACC just aren't as strong as they have been in the past. So they've been able to get away with certain things. They've been able to win certain games and pull out some of these games. But now we're playing against some tournament level teams. And I think when I say grasping, for me, I just want to see something consistent from one game to the next. I think whether that's just being a lockdown defensive team. They had a stretch in there where they were unbelievable defensively. And then all of a sudden they were terrible offensively. Then all of a sudden it flips. Now offensively they're scoring 90 points a game, but they can't hold another team under 84 points a game. So it's like, I think it's just consistency, and they're just grasping for something to hold on to. So yeah, I think grasping is the word for me. But I mean, do we want to answer Sherrell's question, or do we want to wait?
If you feel, dude, if you feel froggy, make that jump, bro.
I was working on it, and I was like, well, Justin hasn't been on a bad team like in college or high school.
Whoa, you must forget where I got drafted to. Then
that's why I said I changed it to college or high school. College or high school.
Thankfully, I was blessed to have a really good homeschool team and a really good North Carolina team for all 3 years. But losing is no fun, right? And I think that's why when I sit here and I say, like, fans, like, just basically dogging the players, dogging the coaches.
Yeah.
Like, these guys are sitting in their room, in their dorm room, thinking about how they basically were losing by 30 to Duke, right? Like, they sit there and they deal with that. Now, is there a part of, hey, we got to have some real, like, factual truth talks about, hey, where we are, things we need to change, how we need to get better? Yes, 100%. You should never take that out of the equation. But to just sit here and just say blanketed statements, I think for me, I would prefer to say, hey, this team isn't a great team, right? To sit here and say the program and the UNC in general isn't great. I think that's also a disservice to the University of North Carolina basketball. But I mean, it's losing's no fun, but at the same time, you got to figure out what you got to do better, right?
Justin, let me dig into where you're at right here, because I think you're getting into something. A lot of folks would love to hear this from you. It is a down year, and I think you've been a part of the program. No, not to my knowledge, nobody else here can say that, including the folks in the chat. How do you help rationalize? And this is where I think a lot of fans are going. How do you rationalize the fact that North Carolina's now lost 40 games in a 4-year stretch or 5-year stretch or whatever? That seems to me like the program that you helped build and were a part of, that standard is incredibly high. How do you rationalize as a former player and help us understand? How do you rationalize having kind of a lot less consistency than what you even experienced when you were wearing the jersey?
That's a great question. I think my first thing that I would say was it took a while for the program to be built up to where it was, right? Like I was on the podcast the other day with Raymond Felton, and he said he even mentioned himself. He came in, I think the year after, it was a 8-20 team or something like that. Now, if we're
Yes.
sitting here talking about how bad this team is, what was that, right?
Well, it's
Like,
funny. Somebody said in the chat earlier that this is the worst team in 30 years. And look, it's been a while, but it ain't quite 30 years since that 8-20 team was here.
And that's kind of my thing is, hey, I'm all for, helpful criticism. I'm all for, hey, this team can't really shoot. We don't have size inside. Rebounding is an issue. Defensively, sometimes we, don't execute the way we're supposed to. I'm all for that type of talk. But whenever you sit here and make statements like that, like this is the worst UNC team we've seen in 30 years and that sort of stuff, I think that we need to kind of take a step back. And this is kind of where the fans have a hard time doing it because they're so in the now, right? Like this is the team that I'm watching. I don't even remember. Heck, you could probably ask a ton of fans if they even remember some of the games from 2017 when we won the whole thing, right? Like, do you remember when we lost to Georgia Tech at Georgia Tech? Like, what were y'all saying after that game, right? And then we went on and won the whole entire thing. So I think that's why I say we have to be very slow to just give blanketed negative statements if it's not backed up by some sort of real factual, whether it's stats or just things that we've seen.
I have a group chat, Justin, and I will tell you that Georgia Tech game. It was on New Year's Day, I think, if I recall correctly.
And didn't y'all get caught in the snow or something? Was that the one where y'all had to ride the MARTA, or no? Is that a different game?
I mean, heck, I don't even remember, to be honest with you. I just
Sorry, go
remember
ahead. I interrupted the story. My bad.
I remember my in-laws were there, and it was an awful game, and it was not a great first game for them to watch. So that's all I remember from that game.
I just remember the group chat was torn apart. People were leaving and cussing each other out because it was because everything that y'all had been through the year before with Villanova and all that, and it that one particular game. The fact that you mentioned that one specifically was just funny to me. That's all.
I mean, think about that. Like we won the national championship that year, and now I'm by no means comparing our team to this team, but like to sit there and guys were probably losing their minds when we lost that game, right? Instead of sitting there and saying, okay, you know what? Yeah, that's a bad loss, but let's see what happens going forward. That's just kind of the mentality of fans. And I get it. You're all support, you're all love for the program that you're supporting. But when you really take a step back and you look at things, I think it looks a little bit different, bigger picture.
All right. So something else I would love to get you guys to kind of go here. Where do teams go mentally when things are just not working? Because I think that's something that until you've been inside the locker room or until, and Justin, you made a great point in kind of pointing out where you had this in your pro career. How do you mentally get past the place of like, okay, I'm not going to jump off the roof of the Smith Center, to use an old Roy Williamsism. I'm not going to jump off the roof of the Dean Dome after we lost one game. But also, how do you maintain a sense of pride? Because I think I know Sherrell's answer. I know Sean's answer. But again, you've been the guy that's been inside that locker room. So how do you stay locked in as a squad and still play for pride while recognizing that, yeah, we're kind of sucking hind teat right now?
I think that goes back to just competing and loving the game. And I think that's one of the issues that I've seen throughout the season is like just the competitiveness consistently, I feel like has not been there to really be a great team, right? Like we've seen halves of, man, this team really, they show that they could really be a good basketball team if they played this way for heck 30 to 35 minutes in a game. But then for you to have lapses, for you to have certain games where you're up 10 and you end up losing by 5, or you're, whatever some of these games that have the way that they've ended. For me, it's just the competitiveness. Like you said, like I was in Sacramento my first 2 years in the NBA, and the first year I think we won 18 games, 20 games, something like that. And that's obviously different. You're getting paid. I mean, these guys are getting paid, but you're getting paid a good amount of money. You're a grown adult at that point. Like, you've got other things to deal with. But for me, it was just, I loved basketball and I loved getting better. And I loved, even though it's tough at times, I loved seeing what I needed to get better at and to try to work on that. And that was just part of the work ethic and competitiveness. Like, I didn't like losing. None of us liked losing when we were there, and we were tanking at that time. Like, everybody knew we were going to try to lose, but none of us liked it and none of us enjoyed it. And when we went to practice, the practices were competitive as if we were playing for an NBA championship, right? So I think and obviously I'm not there at practice every day. I don't see how that goes. I don't know how practices go. They very well could be competitive, but for things to translate into a game, usually it starts in practice and in workouts and things like that. And so that's how I always dealt with things. Was like, man, we really are losing a lot of games, but I'm gonna make sure to get better. And um, I can't speak on if they're doing that there, but it's that competitive spirit that I just haven't seen consistently enough to allow that.
I've got a question for Justin, because I think probably now it's a lot more challenging knowing that there could be almost a full-scale change, or players can, pretty much every year it's free agency, right? So just going back to, I was just looking up your freshman year, obviously what laid the foundation to get to the championship game and win the championship. But there's a stretch, I just looked, you guys went 2-5 in ACC play towards the end. Do you think that would have been different, in this era, with potential players having agents and being talked to? I guess for this year, I think the challenge is, to come back mentally of just saying, hey, I'm ready to go somewhere else, or I'm ready to do this, or vice versa. So I'm just kind of curious your thoughts, trying to put yourself in that situation back in that freshman year.
I'm gonna be honest. I would have loved to have a little extra money in my pocket when I was in college, but I truly don't know how I would have been in this era. As far as, I can't sit here and say, oh, these guys need to realize that they got to still work hard or whatever. Like, if I have a photo shoot that makes me $50,000, as opposed to going back to the gym and getting shots up like we did almost every night, that $50,000 sounds pretty good, right? So it would be very hard in this era. Now, I think, and this is kind of where I think the negative side of the NIL and transfer portal and stuff like that is, it's taking the importance of making it to the next level away from these kids, right? So, like, for me, when me and everybody before NIL, it was like the only way for me to get paid was for me to continue to get better, continue to work, to win, to make it to that next level. Now I think you're kind of seeing it's just a different mindset. But at the same time, these kids have to realize that the end goal is not this NIL, right? Like, the end goal. Now, if these guys don't want to make it to the league or to the pros, then so be it, right? Like, that's their prerogative. But I think there's just a certain level of discipline, a certain level of work ethic that you have to have, no matter whether you're in this era or not, to be really good and to be competitive. And I think at times this team has shown that they have it, and then they show that they don't really have it. So I think that's the bigger issue than the NIL and sort of thing. But, what do I really know?
So I want to come back to a couple of things. I think a lot of folks have had some frustrations over kind of in-game stuff recently. I mean, you saw North Carolina have leads and give them away in multiple games, and I think that's a fair criticism. Sherrell, going into the Duke game, I think anybody who's watched Duke and watched UNC this year knew that was a big discrepancy between those two teams. You had a Duke team that is not only deep, they're incredibly tall, they defend well, they shoot well, they score from all three levels. North Carolina, not tall at all, has not defended incredibly well, definitely hasn't defended the post very well. It was a bad matchup, plus both teams were trending in opposite directions. Going back to my point about Hubert's in-game stuff, I think a lot of folks felt like Hubert should have tried a bunch of different stuff last night. And we did see him use some zone a little bit, but Hubert shouldn't have put so-and-so on this player and so-and-so on that player. In my mind, I don't think it would have mattered. I think it's a little bit Monday morning quarterback is to say, hey, why didn't he try this, this, and this? I don't know that they had a much more than a small chance to win that game on the road last night. I'm asking you, Sherrell, is this more about an indictment of roster construction or something else, or is this one of those things where maybe Hubert could have schemed them into a win?
For me, ultimately, my favorite phrase when it comes to basketball is what is more important than how. And all that matters is that Duke is, I don't want to say light years, but Duke is a much better team this year, and I think consistently has been a better program for a little bit, for a while. Really post 2019, pretty much, after the Kobe White team. Since then, I think Duke has been a better program. And, missing a guy in the portal, guys not making shots, the how doesn't matter, but they're there now. It's the what. It's what happened. So you can say, yeah, the Trimble thing, starting Trimble on flag. Again, I'm not a basketball coach, so I'm sure there was something they saw in practice. I don't think they're just out here making random decisions like that, but it didn't seem like the best decision. But again, I'm not in practice. It seemed like Powell would have been a much better matchup. So there's stuff like that you can say, I don't think that makes the most sense from where I'm sitting. But again, I don't have the amount of information they have. What matters is that North Carolina is not a good basketball team this year, and that it kind of showed up in a way that I think the national media and folks around the country hadn't seen yet. Like, it's one thing to say or hear, oh, North Carolina's got 8 losses on January 25th, and yeah, they blew some leads, and they were close against Kansas and close against Florida. This is just more about this team not winning in the final minutes, when in reality, I think those of us who have watched the team this year have seen that there's just some systemic things that are difficult for them to overcome, difficult for them to scheme through. And again, that part of it is more of the how, but again, it goes back to the what. And the what is that it's not a good basketball team right now. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not sure if I answer your question, but I think it's more so that ultimately, Hubert Davis is responsible for the what of North Carolina basketball. And the wins, the losses, the misses, the wins, all that stuff ultimately falls on him. And that's kind of where I'm at, is that the what is just not good right now.
Justin, before I get into a little bit of something I think everybody can kind of lean their heads into, I'm not sure that Hubert Davis has lost this team. I think a lot of folks think that. They may ask that. You may point to X, Y, and Z and say he's lost his team. I don't know. I'm not there. I do think we can all agree, though, that whatever he's saying and whatever his messaging is just isn't resonating enough to carry over onto the floor. I would ask you he was an assistant while you were there, but also, Coach Williams was probably a little different. I'm not sure. I'm going to ask you, did you ever feel like there was a time where Coach was saying A, B, and C, and either the players weren't hearing it, weren't executing it, or both? And how do you get back once that's kind of out on the table? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I think if you really, truly know Coach Davis, everybody talks about how positive he is in the press conferences and everything like that. That's just who he is as a person, right? Like as a assistant when I was there, like you couldn't ask him to say a negative word. Like there was literally nothing negative came out of his mouth, right? So when he's answering these questions and he's doing these, post-game stuff, obviously people want to hear like really what's going on or what the issues are, but he's always going to lean into that side of things. So I think when people just, hammer him on being so positive, that's just who he is as a person, right? Like that's just, you can't knock somebody for being a particular kind of person. When it comes to losing a team, I've seen coaches really lose a locker room. And I will tell you, I would not say that this locker room is lost. I think the tough part about and the reality of this is certain things that are said as far as, we want to do this, we want to do that, certain, schemes and things like that. You still have to have the talent and the competitors to go out there and do it, right? Like that's just the reality of it. All 3 years, even my freshman year when we lost a ton of close games my freshman year. But even then, like certain things that Coach Williams wanted us to do, we had the ability to do it, and we had guys that wanted to go out there and compete and do it at the same time. On this team, at times, I can't. It doesn't seem like there's a real connection when it comes to that aspect of things. Like you talk about, that was the one thing that was so obvious to me was, would I have loved to see Drake start on Cooper Flag? 100%. Like that's just me personally. I think just a little bit more length and size. Do I see maybe what they were trying to do, getting a smaller, more physical guard to really climb up into a bigger guy? 100% as well. But when you look at just simply that, they didn't have the talent to be able to execute that at that particular time, which is why I say I would have loved to see Drake. Because when you have Seth guarding in the post on a 6'10" guy, right? Almost 7 feet, basically.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you send a double or not. He's looking. I mean, there was multiple times he was on one block and just skipped it directly to the opposite corner for a 3. Right?
He's that good of a passer, and that's the thing a lot of people don't realize.
He's that good of a passer, and you've got a 6'4" guy in front of him on a double team. So you can't expect this North Carolina team to be able to do much when they're doing that sort of stuff on the court. So I think it's a mix of things. I mean, we could go on and on about it, to be honest with you. But you have to have that mixture of guys who really want to get it done and also the talent to be able to put it out there on the floor. And I think there's kind of been a discrepancy in both of those kind of all year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sean, I'm gonna throw some red meat at you here in a second. First, I want to throw some blue clothing at you from Johnny T-shirt. So we're gonna go from blue clothing to red meat. But Johnny T-shirt can take care of your blue clothing, or if you like navy clothing, if you like Argyle clothing. Regardless of how the play on the floor has been, Johnny T-shirt is still elite with their ability to be the official haberdasher of Inside Carolina. JohnnyT-shirt.com, if you're a premium subscriber, which right now I have no idea why you're not, if nothing else, just because of all the stuff that's popping off with football. My text messages were blowing up today because so many dudes are wanting to come play for Bill Belichick. Anyway, if you're not a premium subscriber, go ahead and make that happen. But if you're a premium subscriber, use your extra 10% off that you find in that code on the premium message board at Johnny T-shirt. You'll save yourself a little bit of cash, and then you can buy more gear. Johnny T-shirt has been a huge supporter of Inside Carolina content for a long time. Locally owned, alumni operated, just really, really good folks. And if nothing else, we want the good folks that listen to this here show to be connected to other good folks like the folks at Johnny T-shirt. Make it happen. Johnny T-shirt, big sponsors of ours. We're going to take a quick break here. If you're listening to us in the audio version, there'll be some national ads that drop in for a second. If you're with us on video, stick around. We'll talk a little bit more UNC basketball here on the Coast to Coast. I'm Joey Powell. Got Justin Jackson, Sherrell McMillan, and Sean Moran with me. Fellas, I think it's time to reset some expectations. We have talked about it multiple times. And so I'm gonna kick this to you, Sean, and see if you might start us off, because I know this is a bit of a gross topic. It's a weird topic. It's a nuanced topic, but I think at this point in the year, Justin laid it out. We've laid it out on multiple shows. This 4-game stretch is not going well. They've already started off 0-2. But I want to ask you, resetting expectations, throw what's happened out of the year. What can be salvaged this season? And you can talk about records, you can talk about player development, you can talk about momentum, you can talk about backdooring an NCAA bid, whatever. All of it's on the table for you, but I'm going to go to you first, Sean.
I'll take a glass half full approach to start, which is probably not my usual foray, but you watch the game and you see UNC first 4 out. So even with everything going on, there's still, once again, in this particular team, a small glimmer of hope. I think as we look at this 4-game stretch, we're talking about an elite team in Duke, but then we're talking about, two teams that are top 30, which normally UNC wouldn't be struggling with or that concerned of. But I think with this, you have Pitt at home. You have you have a team that you were up 7 to 10 points at different points in the game. And then you have a at Clemson game, which will be extremely tough. And then after that, the schedule is fairly light until you get to Duke. I think the one thing holding me back, obviously, is what we've talked about, the consistency and the lack thereof that we have seen. But from everything we've talked through this, it's always been one week at a time, given the fluctuations. And if they do get a win against Pittsburgh, that's a Q2 win, and then it sets them up to get a Q1 win the following week. As low as those percentages might be, at least in the next 10 days, there's still a glimmer of hope. But we talked in January, what should their record be? And I think I went, well, it should be 8-1, but we'll go 6-3. I think they went 5-4. This one I think can be a toss up, because if they do lose the next two games, then they could easily lose at Syracuse and some of the winnable games that we're talking about right now. So in terms of the positive, there's two games that can make a difference for the season, but I think we've also seen enough from the consistency and just the physical attributes, as well as the mental attributes, that this team just does not possess to probably make a run to get into the tournament. So it does feel very 2 years ago that there's hope and there's situations, but we probably know the outcome for what's going to happen over the next month.
Artfully done, my man. Sherrell, same question.
I don't know. I think there's been a lot of damage done this season, in my mind at least. And I don't know if a miraculous NCAA tournament run or winning an ACC championship or anything like that will mask some of those issues. Now, I know they say winning cures all, but if you're looking at the kind of bigger picture, there's some systemic stuff that has popped up, each year over the last 5 or 6 years. It's like, how can they root that stuff out? And so for me, it's like, perhaps if there was some growth in some of those areas that we've seen over and over again, like the late game execution. I mean, from the on the court perspective, that's probably the only thing. But some of the mindless, I want to say mindless, that's rude. Some of the turnovers that happen maybe without full thought, let's put it that way. If some of that stuff can start to get cleaned up, I think even without an NCAA tournament appearance, you might feel a little bit better. But if they just, kind of go on a run, go on a bender, get hot, and the same stuff is happening, then, it's hard to look to the future and say, okay, the program is now stable, because that stuff has been happening over and over and over again. So for me, I kind of look at it, unfortunately, like glass half empty, because the same stuff is repetitive. There's that lack of consistency. It's just over and over and over and over. And until that changes, I just don't know if the program can reach some of the heights that it has in the past.
I think that's fair. Go ahead, Sean.
I was going to say, I think from that picture, to me, the identity has probably been the frustrating part of what, when Justin was playing and Coach Williams, offensive rebounding, up tempo, you knew what they were going to beat you in. And I think that's been maybe the frustrating point over the last few years with ups and downs, is what is the overall identity. I think last year was the most connected, as well as the tournament run. We'd seen the players, and I think yesterday when you watched Duke, they were making decisions at a much quicker pace. They knew exactly UNC's weaknesses and how to exploit them with the pick and rolls and the screens, et cetera. And they were moving quicker, but then you also saw them, we talked about it, the huddles during free throws or fouls, and just them talking and them more mentally into it. And I think that's probably a hard part, just what Sherrell was saying of the individual improvement. And in reality, it could be a total blank slate for the team next year in terms of players using up their eligibility, players going to the NBA, and players of their own accord, or the coaching staff moving on. And it could be just a completely blank slate. So that's kind of the hard thing for me of trying, if they're not making the tournament, what is that general improvement point? Because realistically, it probably should be blown up and starting anew, given that that is feasible these days.
So I have a question for Justin, and well, I have two, but I'll go with the first one. That's not as invasive, let's say. I have a theory about leadership and teams and all that. I'll keep it to myself. I think I've displayed it on this podcast a few times, but like, how important is it to have like a leader who will get in your face and call guys together? Because I think fans and even media folks, they kind of they just love seeing somebody scream at somebody because it to them it shows them like intensity and passion and all that stuff. But like, is that something that players need on the court? Is leadership, player leadership, like that big of a deal? Because I've seen it talked about over and over and over.
It's a massive thing for a team to be successful. I mean, Coach Williams held us accountable every single day in practice, every workout, every conditioning, everything like that. So it trickled down to us, but we also had guys who, once again, it goes back to just wanting to win, right? So it didn't matter what it was. Theo loves telling the story of when we were playing against Oregon and I yelled at him because he switched and didn't switch up. And the guy I was guarding hit a three and I yelled at him to get up, whatever. But there is a time and place that these players have to hold each other accountable, right? And I think there's only so far. I've always been a guy that leads by example, always. Like I've 99% of the time, I'm not one that gets all loud and gets into guys' faces and things like that. But there is a time and place, especially if you're one of the main guys, right? So, like, I look at a guy like RJ, who's been there for 5 years. We all know what he accomplished last year and all the accolades and things like that. And he is that same exact guy of just leading by example. But there are times in a game where, Elliott made a couple passes against Duke where it was just directly to the Duke defender, right? And so there's a time and place for somebody like RJ to be like, hey, Elliott, we got to be smarter with the ball. Like, we can't make that pass, make the easy one, right? Like, just simple things. It doesn't have to be you're all spitting in each other's face, going at each other. I think that's ignorant, especially it shows kind of a brokenness to a team, in my opinion. But there's a time and place for you to hold people accountable and to hold players accountable and teammates. I mean, you go through so much throughout the season to not want to win really, really badly by any means, right? So I think if I had to say that there was one thing that was consistent, I would say it's kind of the lack of leadership on the floor throughout the year. Shots are going to fall, they're not going to fall. Defensively, you might have the effort, you might not. It's just the way basketball goes sometimes. But there should always be a leadership part of it. And that starts in practice. It starts in preseason. But I think that's kind of what it was. We were lucky. I mean, heck, the year we won it, we didn't have anybody that really, Theo can act like he was somebody that would get all up in your face, but we never had anybody that was really just all up in your face if you messed up or whatever. But we also had guys who could be, who could say stuff to each other and people wouldn't take it personally, and guys would go out there and change it and do what they were supposed to do. So I think without seeing practice in an everyday situation, that's something that I've seen kind of lacking throughout this season.
So something I think, and I appreciate you laying that out for us, Justin. Something I think that, as we talk about expectations and where things go from here, are there other ways that you could have potentially, would shaking up the lineup, I think, change anything? Because I think North Carolina fans have seen stuff from different players, that maybe they'd like to see something different. Wondering if it'll change some results. So we've talked about it here on the show, but we haven't needed to the last time you were here. Someone asked you. I mean, I look at a guy like Drake Powell that comes in and it seems like when he gets the ball in his hands, most of the time he does good things with it. I'd like to see some more things run for Ian Jackson, but I'm not sure how you do that. I don't know. I'm just asking you, what do you think there's some lineup things that could get changed to at least give this team some potential for evolution as the season winds down? I'm not saying wholesale changes that change the outcome of the year, but I mean things that could potentially give you some of that consistency or some of that identity that we're looking for and have been looking for the better part of 5 weeks.
Who's that for? Because I mean, we can go on and on about lineups if we really want to. I mean, I think my question for y'all is, do y'all think I'll take Florida for example, since we played against them. Do y'all think if we had one of those bigs that Florida has, that this team would look totally different?
No,
No,
I think
no.
it would look different to an extent, but it wouldn't it wouldn't materially change where UNC is at. I
Okay.
think having seen just a lack of consistency in the shooting and other issues that have cropped up.
I think you make a really good point just from the shooting aspect of things. But I think shooting looks totally different with the big. I think offense looks totally different with the big. I think defensively, this team looks totally different with the big. I don't even know what his name is that played for Florida. But I mean, he was blocking shots, dunking. I mean, heck, the guy Clifford at Alabama. You throw one of those guys into this lineup, right? I don't think we're having these discussions that we're having. And
Is
the
it?
reason I say that, go
Well,
ahead.
hang on, just is it spacing, or do you feel like just because I feel like the team now is getting. They will get better shots if they had a post player for sure, because it would make the spacing better. But I still see this team getting wide open looks from three now that they can't hit.
100%. That's why the shooting aspect is something that you can't necessarily go around. But think about just if you have a big that you can really throw in that can just go just a simple right hook, right? We just said North Carolina didn't touch the paint for the first 10 minutes because it was all guards just trying to get downhill. And the bigs, I mean, heck, they were switching their 7-3 center onto our guards because they weren't worried at all about our bigs at all, right? So you get a big that is just simply can take a switch, go to the block. We're not asking him to average 20 and 10 like Mondo did, but simply go to the block, you feed it to him, right hook, you make 2 or 3 of those, now all of a sudden the defense completely changes, right? Like that's just the way basketball works. Adjustments, you have to make it unless you're just like, okay, you know what, we're just going to give it up the entire game. So now all of a sudden you make an adjustment to where either you run a double or you don't switch. Now you're able to get these guards who can't necessarily shoot great, are able to get downhill and get to their strengths, right? Elliott's able to get downhill as opposed to just switching and taking him out and he's having to be 30 feet from the basket, right? So I think me personally, that's what's so difficult about this season is because it's like if we just had one, right? Just one, it would be totally different. I'm not saying that this team would have went into Cameron Indoor and would have won. I'm not saying that by any means. But I think this team, the dynamics of this team would be totally different, right? Because now you're asking for a freshman in Ian Jackson, a freshman in Drake Powell to go into Cameron Indoor, right? And now, Ian, we need you to score 25 because
To
that's
be
what he's been
competitive,
doing.
not to win,
To
to
be
be competitive.
competitive,
Yeah.
right? Like, that's just not realistic. Not that he's not capable of doing that, but now Ian is right underneath RJ, if not right there with RJ on the scouting report. And this team is a really good defensive team. So it's hard for me to really give a real, like, man, I don't really know what we can do to change this season because I can't help but think if we had a big, right? Now that goes back to transfer portal recruiting. Thankfully, we've got a big fella coming in next year from high school. Hopefully he can kind of, solidify himself there. But it's just difficult. And then it looks so obvious in a game like this, right? It just looks, I mean, like we said, we got a 6'4" guy guarding a 6'10" guy. We've got a 7'3" guy on Duke blocking shots with his elbow, right? Like it just looks so much more obvious. But changes, man, I don't know. They've tried different lineups. I mean, they just had a different lineup against Duke, right?
Well,
That's-
so
That's what I
let
was
me
going to
ask
say too,
this.
Joey. It's kind of like there's there's two parts of this. Like,
Mhm.
yes, they are responsible for the roster, and I think they own that, and they understand that the roster was deficient. And folks don't believe it, but I think they knew, and that's why they went after big, after big, after big, after big, all the way from kind of the second the Alabama game was over into August when they signed Ty Claude. They were just trying to find a big, trying to find a big. So they knew that there was an issue there, but kind of like on top of that is just like because of that lack of a big, it's like, well, what exactly are they trying to do, or what exactly can they do? Because not only is the big thing an issue, but also the other player that they signed in the portal that they thought would probably man the four, just right now or this whole season really hasn't been playable. So essentially, you're missing the person you thought was going to be your starting four. They had Withers coming back, but you kind of understand what Withers is and what he can do and his limitations. And then they tried to find a big. So when you add all that together, the roster is in such a state that there's no levers to pull. There's no more buttons. There's nothing to do because the roster is deficient. So like part of it is they can't change anything this season because they are where they are, and they are where they are because of what happened in the offseason. So part of it is them, and part of it is just what they have. And I think all of us are having some issues kind of coupling or uncoupling, depending upon your point of view, those two things.
Justin, let me ask you this. Would running more offense through the post, and Sherrell and Sean are going to laugh at me here because I've been banging this drum a lot, would running more offense through Jalen Washington make more sense from a spacing standpoint, or you still feel like that's kind of, throwing a shot glass full of water at a house that's on fire?
I mean, look, at this point, try it, right? I mean, it sucks that he's coming off of, whatever kind of injury he had. But I think, something as simple, I'll give you an example. Something as simple as they love to run a bunch of ghost screens, right? Now, for anybody who's listening or doesn't know what a ghost screen is, it's just simply basically a fake screen, like as a guard, or maybe it's a big that can shoot. You run up and you just slip out, cause some sort of confusion for the defense. Boom, an advantage. In that Duke game, and I kind of laughed, but I was at the same time like frustrated. They continued to run ghost screens, and the defense almost didn't even react at all, right? Like there's supposed to be some sort of hesitation. There's supposed to be some sort of like, oh man, the guy guarding the ball doesn't really know what he's doing. Now the guy can get downhill, or we can just kick it back to the guy for a shot or whatever, play out of a closeout. And there were so many times that they just continued to run that, and there just was nothing, absolutely nothing. And so the reason I go back to just having a big, if you get a big, which I think is also, something I've seen throughout the season, which you don't have to be a huge guy. I used to set back screens 24/7 when I was at school. But like screening just isn't really a thing for this team either, whether it's the bigs, Washington or Van Allen or Ty Claude, whoever. Like they just slip out of everything, and maybe they try to act like they're setting a screen, but there's no real hit. So you throw a Mondo in there, which he slipped out of a million screens too, but you have somebody big like that can at least hit somebody. Now the advantages that you have within the offense are a million times better, instead of you're running a ghost screen and the defense is just sitting there in the gaps, or the guy's just still standing right in front. I think some easy things I think that could change, whether it changes their tournament hopes or whatever. I just want to see them be the hardest playing team the entire game, right? So whether that means full court press the entire time, right? At this point, we have nothing to lose. That's kind of where we're at, right? So, hey, let's just run a full court press, right? Let's just pick up full court the entire game. If you're tired, we'll sub somebody in. We'll figure it out. I think offensively, heck, let's just get guys downhill. Let's use guys' strengths. Seth, instead of doing a ghost screen, let's go up, screen, slip out, and roll, right? Get you downhill, being athletic. Let's do just different things within that that are easy changes. Because at this point, like you're basically playing for your tournament lives. Whether there's a realistic chance or there's not, you've got to play as hard as you can and try to make something happen. So I think just a couple of those, I think that can be some simple changes.
Man, putting his coaching hat on, I like it.
Last question for you from me, Justin. And I always think of this moment because I talked to you. I don't know if you remember this, but you probably don't. I talked to your dad after the national championship game that night, and he was just telling me how tired you were, how just completely spent you were from chasing those dudes around, from doing everything it took to win a national championship. And one of the catchphrases I started on here was that I felt like in order for UNC to be successful, they have to get into up-tempo. And to get up-tempo, when you're playing kind of a small lineup, you have to defend until exhaustion. And I tried to explain what that meant, but if you could explain like how hard it is to defend and how hard you have to defend to be a good defensive team, and some of the key things that are required to be a good defensive team. Because I think it would be, in my opinion, and I'm not talking about you in general right here, but I think it's, as far as defense is concerned, I think it's reductive to say that, they're not a good defensive team because they don't have a big. Like, I think there's
Mhm.
more to it than that. So I'm just curious, like, what does defending until exhaustion like really entail?
Physically, it means literally chasing through every screen. It means never falling asleep. It means knowing what assignment you're supposed to have, who you're guarding at all times, what their strengths are, what they like to do, and never letting up on that. Is there going to be mistakes? Yes, like it happens. But to your point, through that tournament, I had just in the final four, I had Tyler Dorsey, who was, I mean, he was shooting an unbelievable percentage and was averaging like 25, and would shoot it from anywhere. You had
He
Dylan
won.
Brooks on that team as well.
Didn't he win their regional MVP, Sean? The fact that he name dropped Dorsey, I feel like he won their regional MVP.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was on fire coming into the Final Four.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I mean, he
Justin.
was-
I'm
No,
trying to
yeah,
echo
I mean,
exactly what you're saying because you're spot on by name checking that guy.
Yeah, to that point, like he was unbelievable. And you had Dylan Brooks, who obviously is in the NBA, doing what he does. Then you go into the championship game, and you had Nigel Williams-Goss, who was unbelievable. And I think he's still playing. You had Jordan Matthews, who could shoot it from anywhere. You had a couple other guys that were really good. And so it was like, hey, I knew Tyler Dorsey, he would shoot it from anywhere. So at all times, you had to be up, whether there was a screen, whether he was coming off a down screen. You're always connected. You can never fall asleep. But then at the same time, you have to know where you're supposed to be on help side, right? So every practice, we would be in shell drill, right? Okay, drive baseline. You got to be, if you're the low man, you got to be over early. Now you got to rotate back out if you X out. Like, there's just certain things. So mentally, there's also an aspect of just always knowing where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to be doing. The reason I say I want this team just to pick up full court, play hard, because that's how they're built, right? Like, they're built to be able to get up and pressure. They're built to have an Elliott, to have a Seth, heck, to have an RJ, like, get up and pressure these guys, to have Drake get up into these fours and make them dribble and make them uncomfortable, to make the lack of rim protection not be as big of a factor. Because I think once you get to the rim, that's where you see the size be a real issue, right? Like, you've seen guys kind of go through some of our bigs' chests, and even like little guards attack and be able to lay. But if you're causing these guys to be uncomfortable from 80 feet away from the basket, they're not going to be able to make it the entire game to the rim. So that's what exhaustion looks like. It looks like, hey, I'm in great shape, but by the end of this game, I need to sit down somewhere, right? Like, I will never forget people people ask me, like, how did you go 0 for 9 from 3? And it's because I was absolutely spent. Like, anytime I shot it, I didn't feel my legs. Like, there was nothing left. But for you to get to that winning stage, like, that's where you have to be, right? There's no sort of, I'm gonna chill this play, right? Oh, it's a backdoor play. Oh, it's okay. They just got to lay up. Like, no, that's not how that works. Like, we want to be good as many possessions as possible and be better than the other team for more possessions than they are. So, to answer your question, that's what it looks like. Obviously the fans and things like that probably have never really felt what that feels like. Just think about, I don't even know what a great comparison is, because it's funny you bring that up. That was the most tired I've ever been. I always say Coach Williams got the most out of my minutes before I left. But yeah, that's what I want to see from this team. I want to see them be, by the end of it, like, their jerseys, they had the awesome retro blue jerseys on against Duke. I want it to be from light blue. I want it to be like a dark hue, right? Like, by the end of the game. Just because, heck, they still might lose by 20, but just because they're just giving their all. I want them to, not catch a ball because they're trying to run through the pass to get to the rim. Like, I want to just see some mess ups like that, as opposed to inbounds play, left hand, trying to get it to the opposite corner, straight to the defender. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of what I want to see from this team, is just be the hardest playing team, right? And then talent sometimes doesn't work, and sometimes it does.
Man, that's going to actually hit a lot of folks just right, because I think I think there's a lot of folks that agree with that wholeheartedly, Justin. So I'm gonna let you off the hook for a second. We'll take some questions from the audience here. And I was wrong. Dorsey did not win the Midwest Region MVP. He was on the Midwest Region all. He was on the All Region team, but his teammate Jordan Bell actually beat him out for regional MOP. But I remember exactly what Justin's talking about because Dorsey was absolutely just a flamethrower, marching them through as a 3 seed. All right, I'm going to hit some questions that I starred in the chat for the folks that are here. I would one question I did get from message boards earlier. Justin, what do you think the offense is trying to accomplish? I know there's kind of this thought of allowing the guards to get their own shots, but I think what a lot of folks are having trouble reconciling in their mind is that there's a lot of dribbling the ball into the ground with no movement. We've talked about it a little bit, but I'd love to hear your perspective as well. It's like, what is this actually trying to accomplish offensively? You know, if the first screen goes off and the option's not there, what's next? What's the philosophy of what this offense is trying to do?
Well, I think it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier. If you think really, if you really think about the best games that North Carolina's played this year, it's been against teams that have played in a coverage on defense, right? So the big isn't switching, the guards trying to fight over, and so you're able to get more advantage just getting some sort of hit on the ball, right? Because a lot of their offense is based on ball screens, getting the big to roll, getting the guards downhill, or heck, even you see a bunch of the actions where it's away actions, where it's 2 screen aways, and then the big is kind of handing it off into a dribble handoff. And even in that situation, if a team is playing in coverage, so the big isn't switching, you're able to get way more advantage. The teams that they've struggled the most with, and it was very evident in this Duke game, is teams that just switch everything, right? So now it doesn't matter if you set a screen and roll because they're just switching it automatically. So then you're just basically, now what do I do at the top of the key? That's where, and it's tough because one of the aspects we just don't have, that's where a real big comes into play, right? Because they have to respect the big enough to say, okay, you know what, we're going to switch, but we might have to double if the big gets it, or we might have to make sure that we have extra help down low just in case they pass it in. And you also have to be able to shoot it from the outside, right? And I think the last thing for me is we really only have one legit ISO basketball player, right? Like that's Ian Jackson. In my opinion, he's one of the best that I've seen in just being able to just go get a bucket. But he, in my opinion, is really the only one that can really just size someone up and be able to score at all 3 levels whenever he wants to, right? Like RJ is a great player off of the catch, great player off the catch. But a lot of times he needs some sort of screen to create an advantage or, something to create some sort of space from the defender. Elliott, guys just kind of guard him inside the 3-point line. And so you can't really go one-on-one with when guys just continue to back up. So that's kind of the limitations of the team when when other teams just switch all the time. You can't really get great looks because it just turns into ISO ball. And I wouldn't necessarily say we're built for, that kind of play.
Well, it's also when you think about a lot of the coaches that are running that, it's an NBA style, and it doesn't work if you don't have NBA talent. I think that's another thing to think about. All right, I'm going to try to go through some of these questions before we get to our last 2 cents. I know I'm running over. I apologize, but appreciate everybody sticking with us. There's almost 600 folks listening to this show tonight. So I'm going to throw these questions, and I'll try to assign them to you guys individually. Let's see. So I'm going to ask this for Sean, actually. Our guy at M. Barnes, is UNC's offensive game plan 5 out? If so, how are their top 2 center portal targets have helped that out? Neither was an outside threat to open the lane. I think it's a good question. I don't want to belabor the who UNC doesn't have, but I think that's a good question for you, Sean.
Well, I mean, I think if you had, whether it's those 2 or any of the, not any, but the majority of the targets they went after, it goes to Justin's point earlier that they can, Big Cliff could hit a right-hand hook shot, and he does have strength, so maybe he's not going to be the go-to guy, but he's going to crash the offensive glass, which is something, I think this is the worst UNC team from offensive rebounding perspective. So, you're losing those extra 6 to 8 possessions from that perspective. So they would have looked totally different. Even Adu, who I wasn't a huge fan of, I know he's would prefer to shoot a 12 to 15 foot jump shot, but once again, you have a guy a little bit stronger, a little bit taller. That now it's it's not going to be complete 5 out, because now you have a guy, if he's not on the low block, he's going to be somebody you have to respect in the paint. And now whether it's guys looking to double him or guys having to stay on him or focusing more on the pick and roll, that's going to open up everything else. And I think we saw that the very first play of the game offensively for UNC, Van Allen Lubin, hard roll to the basket, Cadeau hit him, and it was a layup because they weren't paying attention, and it was a north-south move, which you rarely get to see.
Yeah, for sure. And Sean, one of the things you mentioned a second ago about losing 6 to 8 possessions a game, I think that's where when Justin was making the comment about speeding the game up and maybe pressing, you might stumble into a couple of extra possessions, which if you're not shooting well, that can actually go a really, really long way. Sherrell, I've got this one for you. This is from Charlie Shaw in the chat, and I think this is right up your alley. Would love to hear everybody's take on what the Carolina way looks like in this new NIL revenue sharing era. Is it still possible to build a program like Coach Smith and Coach Williams built? Buddy, if I've ever thrown you a softball, here it is.
Yeah, absolutely it is. It's just harder, and you have to do it every year. That's the difference. That's it. It's possible. It is. It's just harder, and you have to do it every year.
Simple enough. That's not where I thought you were going to go, but I'm impressed. That was well played, counselor. Justin, I'll throw this one to you because you were a guy that with your size on the wing, you were a bit of a matchup problem. But also, I think there's something to consider here. With the size of our personnel, can we be successful at a zone? So Michael Daniels is asking, the fact that UNC is a typically smaller team, I think they could probably work if they did something like a 3-2 instead of a 2-3. But I'd ask you, Justin, what do you think?
I think they tried playing some zone against Duke.
And that was the first time I've seen it this year, I think. Maybe one other possession against Alabama.
Yeah. And I think size is just an issue in general, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're playing man, zone, 1-3-1. Heck, you could have all 5 guys on the, just in a full press, nobody in the backcourt. And size is going to be an issue at times, right? But the only issue with going to zone is rebounding is going to be a real issue. A lot of times you start to, you go to zone because you're like, man, we're too small. We got to just, kind of stay back. Or heck, you'll say a team can't really shoot, so let's go zone. But then the middle is wide open. A lot of times with zone, guys don't really know like who to box out or who to go after, like who's supposed to be in their area and things like that. But like I said earlier, heck, I'd love to see something. Just throw it out there. Like at this point, just go ahead. I wouldn't be like, why in the world are we playing zone, right? Like I wouldn't be that way. I mean, heck, I think last I looked, we were like 16th in the ACC in defense. So why not try something new, right? But I mean, that's a good question. I think at this point, anybody's grasping for anything that could change and be something positive. Go ahead and throw a zone out there. I wouldn't mind seeing something like that.
Yeah, and you can't do that, or you can't do a full court press an entire game. But to Justin's point, I think throw it out, see what happens. All right, last question, then we'll get to our 2 cents. Justin, I'm going to ask you this one because Bart Watts asked you specifically. So I'm going to ask you, and then I'll let Sherrell and Sean take us home with our 2 cents. Without calling out players negatively, are there any wrinkles you think UNC should try? You just mentioned some of those on defense. But Bart's citing Drake Powell action to the basket, maybe alternating distributors. Is there anything you see? I think offensively, he's probably onto something there because, again, so many people keep talking about UNC's ISO and the spread out offense where it's just, one screen and then a prayer.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that would have to be worked on like repeatedly in practice. But I think even having guys like a Drake or an Ian or a Seth, right? Like I was talking about the ghost screens earlier. There's also, if you've got a guy that's not necessarily a knockdown shooter, you play a guard basically in a big type position, right? So he's basically the one who's setting the screens. Guards don't really know how to they don't really truly know unless they're just switching everything right away. They don't really know how to guard like a big type action. So you start changing stuff like that. You have Drake being the one who's setting the screens, right? Who has probably a 4-man on him a lot of times. Or you have Seth doing it who, just to create some sort of confusion. I mean, their offense isn't going to change the rest of the season. We're not going to all of a sudden see, them go heavy post up or, heavy, down screens for Drake and Ian, and it's not going to change like that. But I think there's just different, I think that's the best word to describe it, just wrinkles as far as like keeping guys, keeping the defense kind of honest at times, even with guys who aren't necessarily outside shooters, right? Like you don't have to just, pop to the three every single time, right? Like I love popping to the three, but sometimes I'd mix it up and I'd slip to the basket or, I kind of get like kind of in that mid range area and be able to do some things. So it's just a matter of just mixing things up and keeping the defense honest. I think that's what happens is we get so just ball dominant and just pounding the ball and first action doesn't work. Okay, let me try to go get in my bag real quick and get a bucket, right? And it's like, no, you got 30 seconds on a shot clock, probably 25 by the time you get past half court. Like, let's run the first action. It doesn't work. Let's swing it. Let's go into some sort of, dribble handoff or whatever. And let's see what happens. Now, if it's the last 7 minutes of the shot clock and you got to kind of figure it out and get one up, so be it. But I think they just kind of give up on the offense a little too quickly at times. And so that's why it looks like it's so much, just dribble, shot.
Well, I appreciate you. One of the things I think Justin's done a real good job of tonight is suggesting how UNC can improve efficiency. I mean, basically, Justin is a de facto employee for Congruity HR right now because he's telling you how this basketball team could improve their efficiency and focus more on winning. And if you want to do that with your small or medium-sized business, email matt@congruityhr.com. Matt's going to get you in, and he will show you exactly how his business, Congruity, can take their knowledge, their expertise, their national brand, and tweak your business to save you money on your payroll, your human resources, your benefit plan, all that stuff. Matt's going to help you out. And if he can't help you, he'll say, hey, I can't help you. And you've lost nothing because it's a free assessment. So let Matt take care of you. Matt@congruityhr.com for your free small or medium-sized business assessment. They will take care of you. This is our 2 cents brought to you by Congruity. Sean, I'm coming to you first, man. Give me a penny.
I'll go with mental focus in terms of what Justin was talking about of how hard the team can play and what everybody would like to see. I think we saw it against Florida to start the second half. We saw it the last 2 minutes against BC, but we keep wanting to see it, and it takes very special situations. So I would love just to see more mental focus. First play of the game defensively, they let a wide open dunk because they weren't focused on the switches. A few plays later, double pick and roll on the right corner, another slip because they were both they switched the first time and just kind of once again assumed what each player was going to do the second time. So it goes to that mental focus and being locked in and not asking for it for 40 minutes, but would love just to see it be a little more there, especially against Pittsburgh, which is a beatable team at home, but also a team that is going to try to take their weaknesses and just amplify it even more than they did at Pittsburgh, seeing what worked on Saturday. So, I hate watching the Cable brothers celebrate after beating UNC, especially at the Dean Dome, and if they can have a little more mental focus, hopefully they can at least get a win next week.
That's why we love you, Sean. That's a really good flashback to some things that have been a little bit of kryptonite for this squad. All right, Sherrell, you have the final penny, sir. I want you to take it, shine that some gun up real good, and I need something good out of you because I promise this is going to be a good group therapy session tonight. I'll go ahead and tell you guys, I didn't watch the basketball game live against Duke. I watched The Revenant, and going back and rewatching it, The Revenant was less violent than the UNC Duke basketball game was to start. So I need you to end me on a real good positive note, no pressure. Shine that penny up, throw it out here for me.
I'll say, and I hate bringing this up at the very end because it's going to spur on more conversation, but I've sent y'all clips, I think, over the last couple of weeks, and I've tried to immerse myself in people who know more about basketball than I do to try to find answers. And to a man, they come back and say UNC's offense is not bad. It's not stagnant. I know that goes against everything that we're looking at, but I've asked
You're
so many.
such a troll, bro.
I know I'm not trolling. I'm being honest. I've had so many people, and I've gotten so many opinions from people who are in basketball, who know much more about basketball than I do, and they say to a man, it's attention to detail and execution. I know that's not what people want to hear, and I still have a hard time believing myself when I'm looking at it, but that's what they all say. They say they're running good stuff, they're getting good looks, and too often what happens is when the play breaks down, as Justin said, there's not enough guys on the team who can go one-on-one and get their shot kind of into freelance after option 1, 2, and 3 break down. So I know it looks like pounding the ball and nobody's moving, but there are a lot of smart people who watch Carolina a lot, who know more about basketball than I do, who say that they're running decent offense. Now, it's not translating, but they say that the offense isn't as awful as it looks. So I'll just leave it at that.
Man, you dropped a grenade and walked out of the room like an absolute pro. But we'll allow it because we don't have this show without you, sir. All right, guys, it's been a long show. I apologize to everybody for running over tonight, but look, we have when you have 25% more show, you got to go 25% longer. And Justin joined us tonight to bring us some unique perspective. Justin, always love what you guys are doing, what you and producer John do on Monday evenings. Folks, check them out if you'd like to. They do it live as well. Good stuff. Again, I wish I could make IC subscribers feel better about what they're seeing, but I'm not really qualified for that. But I hope this show was helpful for those of you who tuned in. Shout out to the 600 folks that were in here at one point in time. And if you're listening to us later in a podcast, hey, thanks for downloading and for getting us as part of your regular rotation. If you have not, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review all of IC's content. There's just so much that we're throwing at you right now, both on basketball and football side of things. There's a lot of stuff happening around Carolina athletics that even if the basketball team's not giving you what you need, there's plenty of other stuff, and we hope you're reading our things. Shout out to Sherrell McMillan and Sean Moran for the level-headed analysis. As always, you guys make me feel better anyway, and that's all that really matters, right? To John Sigley for producing, Congruity and Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring us. We will catch you guys next time here on the Coast to Coast on InsideCarolina.com.